Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I know that people are joining all over the world. Thank you very much for joining the launch webinar of the State of the Global Mini-Grid Market Report 2024. This report serves as a comprehensive resource aiming to drive investment and inform decision-making in the sector, and is the second edition following the State of the Global Mini-Grid Market Report that we published back in 2020. This report was produced with funding from UK Aid and the UK government via the Transforming Energy Access platform, and we thank them for their continuous support. Please note that we are recording the webinar, and the recording will be uploaded on SE4All YouTube channel and our website at a later stage. I will just quickly walk us through the agenda for today and also present our panelists. First, we will hear from Damilola Ogunbiyi, who is the CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and the co-chair of UN Energy. Damilola, unfortunately, could not join us in person, but she has kindly prepared a recording. Then we will hear something about the background and the objectives of the report. We will hear about the general trends, enabling environment and business model trends from Irene Calvet-Saborit, who is a principal specialist on energy access at SE4All. Following Irene's remarks, we'll hear from Elena Adamopoulou, who is a technical director at Economic Consultant Associates that were leading on the report production. And we will hear about financing trends, technology trends, economic trends, impact outlook, and recommendations. After that, we will hear from Stephen Hunt, who is a Senior Energy Innovation Advisor at FCDO, and he will say something about the initial response to the report. This will be followed by a panel discussion, the topic of which will be importance of data collection and standardizations for accelerating delivery. Irene will moderate the panel, and the panelists will be Stephen Hunt, who I've just mentioned, but we also have Benjamin Curnier, Principal Green Mini-Grids Officer at AFDB, Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. Then we will have Amon Mwadini, Director for Research, Data and Standards at AMDA, Africa Mini-Grid Developers Association. And finally, we have Tatia Lemonjava, who is an energy specialist at ESMA project of the World Bank. So I will stop here and let's play Damilola's recording, please.
Esteemed colleagues, distinguished attendees, ladies and gentlemen, the global challenge of electrification, crucial for achieving Sustainable Development Goal 7, SDG 7, has been both progress and setbacks. For example, for the first time in over a decade, the number of people living without electricity has increased, reaching 685 million. This signifies a worrying trend. Population growth is outpacing new connections, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. The 2024 Tracking SDG 7 Energy Progress Report shows that the remaining population lacking electricity access has lower incomes and lives in more remote areas than those who have been newly connected over the past decade, thus making the road ahead to end energy poverty a bit more complex. Decentralized renewable energy can bring electricity to the difficult-to-reach rural populations where much of the remaining unconnected populations lives. In addition, the productive uses of rural communities, such as solar water pumps, refrigerators, agro-processing machinery, and a wide range of equipment for micro-enterprises, can contribute to socio-economic development and improve quality of life. The State of the Market Report on Global Mini-Grids 2024 that we are launching today serves as a comprehensive resource aiming to drive investment and inform decision-making in the sector. I would like to highlight some of the key statistics that have stood out for me in this report that shows the progress we are making in this sector. First, the cumulative share of solar PV systems in mini-grids has seen a remarkable increase, growing from 14% in 2018 to 59% in 2024. This has gone a long way to displace diesel and petrol gensets that continue to plague developing nations. Second is the total committed funding for ongoing programs. From the data available, amounts to over 3.1 billion. This represents a 50% increase compared to 2020 levels, showing greater commitment to the sector from public and private sector players. It is vital that we come together to fix the issues that are still holding back the sector, to further address the slow pace of scalability that we are witnessing. At Sustainable Energy for All, we are committed to continuing to offer our expertise to the Mini-Grid Partnership to accelerate the development and deployment of clean energy mini-grids. We also do so through our Universal Energy Facility. As I conclude, I would like to thank the UK government, the Carbon Trust team, the Economic Consulting Associates, and our valued colleagues and partners for their support in the development of this report. I hope we can use this report as a critical resource to raise awareness about mini-grids, mobilize investments, and serve as a benchmark to measure progress in the sector for decision makers. I wish you all a productive webinar and launch. Thank you.
We thank Damilola very much for the remarks. I will just mention, because I haven't done it before, that after the panel discussion, we will have 30 minutes for you to ask any questions. And please do so in the Q&A box, just stating who the question is for. And we will start sharing our slides again now, and I will pass the mic to Irene, who will tell us more about the background and objectives of the report. Irene, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So I'm trying to keep it brief because we have a lot of topics to go through. But please, and Maya, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of you can download the report from the Mini-Grid Partnership website for all the details. So just in general, on the overview of the report context and approach, as you know, this is an update of the last report we went through, and the biggest challenge we have faced is to try to collect the data. So with ECA, we have done, I think, an impressive work together, reaching, as you can see, I don't like to read slides, so you can see the amount of mini-grid projects and developers we consult, but we went not only for data, but also for the insights, like really talking to people and trying to understand what are the trends, what can we expect next, and also what are the barriers perceived by most of the developers, but also the founders. So next slide, please. We see that there is an increase in electricity access from 84% in 2010 to 91% in 2021. What we have tried to do through the report is also to look at the trends, to compare what happens 10 years ago to what is happening now. So you can see there's a huge increase in energy access, but there's still 660 million without access to electricity. And that probably will continue if we follow the same trend without access to electricity. Most of the people being located in the African continent. So next slide, please. From this slide, what I think it's interesting, and that opens a discussion so you can see how the number of connected solar mini-grids by tiers. So if you look at the slide, there's a lot of these mini-grids already in a tier 2. And I think this chart and this analysis can lead also to a discussion on the adequate tier, or what we consider as energy access, which is a general topic in not only for mini-grids, but I guess in the energy access world. So this brings additional information to the table. Next slide, please. Now let's go for the general trends. So in the general trends, as you can see from 2018, there has been a huge increase on mini grids. It's true that we haven't seen scale yet, but there's a good trend. There's a positive trend, and especially knowing what happened in 2020, 2021 with the COVID, that hasn't halted the development of mini grids. So I think that's good news, especially with the initiatives that have been put together by donors, by funders to try to avoid the COVID totally pausing the development of mini grids, but we haven't reached yet the scale we are trying to achieve. Next slide, please. On the type of clients, I think this is something we've been discussing as a sector for a while. If you remember, 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago, we were really discussing about this idea of anchor client with the telecom towers, but with also other ideas that bring to the table more and more. And this is not only about the chart, but also about the individual discussions we had within the sector. We are realizing that we are diversifying the type of clients we can find in a mini grid. We are not looking anymore for this idea of a magical anchor client, but really focusing on different business models, because you can find, and that's in the report, some business models that are more addressing like residential clients, others are focusing on, let's call it industrial clients, which is the productive use of electricity. And that's what you can see in the chart. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is very important, especially given the commitment to clean energy. The percentage of solar mini grids has increased a lot, and with that, the decrease on the mini grids powered by diesel. It's not that there has been a switch, it's that most of the new additions are solar mini grids. And given the decrease and the constant decrease that keeps decreasing of solar and everything that goes around solar, I think we can safely say that this trend is going to continue. Next slide. The environment trends. I think this one is very important, which is, I just mentioned a couple of slides ago that we need to focus on how to tackle these people, these 600 and something million people without access to electricity. So everything related to regulation is key. How to attract private capital, how to disperse the money. So one of the important trends, I think, is the idea of integrated energy planning. More and more, this idea of working in silos like mini grid and solar home system and grid, and this separated approach is being replaced, that idea, by the concept of integrated energy planning. Let's try to talk about connections and not anymore about mini grids, like creating some even competitiveness between those technologies. That's not the point. The point is really to get connections. And I think that more and more as a sector, we are converging to that idea. And then I think it's also important about the idea, which is summarized in several points, of the one-stop shop relation. A summary of what we saw on the regulatory trends, let's say. That being said, I still think that regulation is a part in a clear approach. We have all the elements on the table, so it's more a matter of implementation. Next slide, please. On the business model trends, next slide, please. I see Steven is saying that I'm slow. Maybe I will remove my video. No, Steven, is probably me. So it's just as that's the light. I'm going to try to do it brief. So the first thing is the focus on scalability. We said for the trends that more and more, yes, we are increasing the number of mini grids, but I don't think we could say we reach scalability. So we really need to think, and now is the right time, what do we need to move from pilot to scalability? And I know we said this for a while, but I think now is really something we need to take seriously. We cannot afford anymore to think about piloting ideas, but really implementing what has worked and really rethinking how to reach scale quickly to, by 2030, reach a fair amount of people. Second point is on productive use of electricity. We have worked a lot as a sector on everything related to the financing of these machines, to the technology of these machines. And now, as the first point, we need to focus on scalability, on how to deploy them massively, because the correlation between the productive use of electricity and the mechanization of work and the socioeconomic development is a reality. And one cannot go without the other. Then there's a third component, which is mesh grid, and this goes into relation with what I mentioned before. So we need to think about integrated energy planning. And quite often we have separated ideas, like solar home system is one thing, mini grid is a second thing. And I think we need to start thinking, when adequate, about intermediary solution. That could be, for example, the mesh grid, which is more and more increasing as a potential solution. And all of that has to be integrated into one single plan of electrification. And last but not least, I would like to mention the vertically integrated value chain. So at the beginning, so when I mean at the beginning, I mean like 10 years ago, at least when I started in this sector, most of the company were completely vertically integrated. Then some of them specialize into some value chains, and now we see a kind of vertical integration, but through partnerships. So through partnership, I mean, usually the same developer is working with the same EPC and with the same technology provider also, but I was going to mention equity provider. So there's a sort of vertical integration that leverages synergies, but at the same time with specialization of every company working on the bit of the value chain that is the one that has the expertise. So I think that's really good news. And I wanted to pop that out. And on this, I think, if I'm not wrong, that my slides are over. So I will handle the microphone to Elena, that will continue with the rest of the trends that we saw in this report. And we will see each other later for the panel. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. It's middle of August, and I know that many people are on leave around this time, so it's great seeing so many of you joining. And I think this popularity of mini-grids is really a testament to the important role that they can play in achieving SDG 7. The important thing to remember here, something that is often overlooked, is that the technology to build these mini-grids is here. We have the expertise to connect even the most isolated communities. There is a cohort of private companies that are committed and have the know-how to develop high-quality mini-grids to provide reliable electricity. And they have been doing this for many years, and they have well-tested models. So now the question is shifting. I think you moved too fast. Can you? Yeah, okay, thank you. So yeah, now I think the question is shifting. It's no longer about proving the mini-grids can work. We know they can. The question now is, how do we scale? How do we move from building a handful of projects to deploying thousands? And just as importantly, how do we ensure that these mini-grids are not just built, but they are sustainable? Next slide, please. There should be a previous slide before that.
I'm sorry, no.
Okay. Right, so now building on what Irene has shared about the evolving landscape of regulations and business models, let's now focus on the financing, technology, and economic trends driving the future of mini-grids. I'm going to start with economic trends, where we're seeing both exciting progress and significant challenges ahead. You cannot see in the slide because that's not the slide I'm talking about, but there's a whole landscape of financiers out there interested in mini grids, from development partners to impact investors, and to a lesser extent, commercial financiers. As of March 2024, 115 financiers with 377 programs have committed $3.1 billion to the sector. That's almost 50% increase compared to the level of funds committed in 2020. That's great, but unfortunately, these funding commitments are not even close to being sufficient to cover the total financing that the sector needs in order to achieve the scale of operations necessary. Also, as regions approach 100% electrification, we see a bigger share of that funding channeled towards sub-Saharan Africa. And now moving on to this slide, the financing landscape of mini grids is very uneven. 12 funders currently account for approximately 8% of the committed funds to the sector, with a total of 160 programs that last on average 4.4 years. We have data regarding planned connections for slightly more than half of the committed funds, and these correspond to 4.4 million connections, the majority of which will come from the World Bank and the African Development Bank. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to recognize that not all of the committed funds are dispersed. Unfortunately, not all funders have disclosed data on disbursements. We only have data for less than 20% of committed funds. So while we don't really have an exact figure for the total market, we know that for those programs for which data is available, by spring 2024, less than 60% of committed funds have been deployed. For those of you with super good memory, you might be wondering why this rate is so much higher compared to the 2020 report. This is because the analysis we followed in this report, in the 2024 version, takes into account the duration of the programs. So if a donor commits, let's say, $10 million today under a 10-year program, we cannot really blame them if by the end of year one, they have only dispersed 1 million. It's important to consider how much of the funding that could be deployed in each year of operations is actually deployed. And now, while it's easy and sometimes convenient to blame the financiers for not dispersing the funds faster, it would be unfair to do so. It's not always the funder's fault for not releasing the funds faster. There are a number of factors that play a role in this. Sometimes the market is not ready, and while funders have been putting a lot of effort to support market readiness by working with partner governments and other institutions, this takes time, especially in countries where markets are in their early stages. Also, a lot of the technical assistance support to the mini-grid sector is currently in the form of results-based financing. This is a mechanism that doesn't pay out until certain milestones have been achieved. So the disbursement is not reported until later in the finance window. There are also a lot of mini-grid programs that are first of the kind. They have an innovative design that has not been tried and tested before. And that means that funders, partner governments, and regulators need a bit more time to set up these facilities. Disbursements might also be delayed because the necessary regulations are not in place. And while funders support actively this process through technical assistance, this is ultimately the role of the governments to ensure that the regulatory framework is conducive to mini-grid investments. Next slide, please. Well, unsurprisingly, most of the financing for the sector comes from donors and governments, and there's currently very little commercial financing flowing into the mini-grid sector. Why is that? Mini-grid investments are still considered very risky from a commercial standpoint. The demand is very low and often unstable, which then leads to uncertain revenue streams. There are often unclear regulations regarding tariffs and what happens when the grid arrives. International lenders are often concerned about the foreign exchange risks, and ticket sizes also matter. Commercial investors are not going to get out of bed for a $50,000 deal. However, it's quite clear that to reach the scale of mini-grid deployment necessary to achieve universal electrification, we need private capital. Development funding is great, but it's simply not enough to provide the amount of capital that we need. And while a lot of efforts have been made to improve the enabling environment for mini-grid investments, as Irene was discussing earlier, very few developers have managed to secure loans for commercial lenders. The risk perception of such investments is still high. So what blended finance does is it de-risks investments by allocating some of the transactional risks to the concessional capital, so it balances the risk-return profile, resulting in transactions that are commensurate with investors' risk-return appetite. Blended finance has been amplifying the impact of public funding, and we see more and more transactions in the mini-grid sector using blended finance, using public funding to mobilize private capital. We see blended finance at project level, we see blending at the fund level, and the fact that different types of investors with different risk appetites and goals can come together is what can mobilize financing at scale. Next slide, please. So apart from blended finance, there are other ways that developers and program implementers are using to attract new sources of capital and improve the financial viability of projects. We see more and more developers selling different types of renewable energy credits, which not only provide an additional revenue stream, but they also help the buyers of these credits, companies like Google and Microsoft, to achieve their decarbonization and social responsibility goals. Another strategy that we see is project aggregation. This involves bundling multiple projects together to allow developers to leverage economies of scale and make the overall deal more attractive to investors. Unfortunately, the foreign exchange risk still remains a big challenge for developers. In some countries in Africa, the local currency lost more than 50% of its value during 2023. One such example is, of course, Nigeria. So now imagine being a developer in that country. On the one hand, you have your revenues in the local currency that is devaluing. And on the other hand, your payment obligations are in dollars. How can you remain financially viable? You cannot order enough inventory, you struggle to repay your debt, or even attract additional capital. Local financing, as you can see in the graph, is very scarce. Based on the data shared by the Mini-Grid Funders Group, only 15% of the financing that is provided to the sector is in local currency. And there are, of course, hedging products available in the markets that protect companies from currency fluctuations, but these are very expensive and they push the cost of capital even higher. Next slide, please. Advancements in technology and the significant drop in the price of mini-grid components has been one of the main drivers of the sector's growth. Since 2000, PV module prices have dropped by roughly 97%. Despite some temporary shocks in supply chain following the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the downward trend in prices has continued. We've also observed an increase in the popularity of lithium-ion batteries compared to lead-acid, not only because their prices have been dropping significantly, but also because They have longer lifetimes, higher efficiency, and lower maintenance needs compared to lead-acid batteries. Next slide, please. Software solutions and digitalization are vital components in the process of optimization and cost reduction. There are many technologies that offer promising avenues for improving the efficiency of commissioning projects and also operating them. GIS tools, for example, have been a game changer for site selection. They can help us identify anchor loads, assess accessibility risks, and ultimately reduce both time and cost. Secondly, planning tools can help optimize the design process. Machine learning and artificial intelligence software help us with forecasting demand more accurately and therefore allowing to optimize the system design and avoid oversizing of systems, which can be very costly. Digitalization also plays a vital role in streamlining the procurement process. By leveraging aggregation platforms, we can significantly lower the cost of equipment, leading to both time and cost savings for developers, which means we can deliver high-quality projects faster and at a lower cost. Lastly, remote monitoring offers a way to optimize operations. Managing sites remotely allows developers to significantly reduce O&M costs, supports more accurate system design, and enables them to track and analyze consumption data effectively. Next slide, please. Now let's focus on some of the key economic trends in the mini-grid sector. Overall, CapEx has been reducing over the years, but we see two conflicting trends happening at the same time. On the one hand, advancements in technology, as I mentioned earlier, improved procurement efficiencies, and the scaling of operations is pushing the prices down. But on the other hand, the price of some of the materials, like copper, has increased substantially over the past 4 years. And also, as the electrification rate within a country increases, the sites that remain electrified are the most difficult to reach, something that pushes the CapEx cost even higher. OpEx has also seen a significant decline. The use of monitoring technologies and other technologies, as we discussed earlier, and economies of scale have all played a role in this. And mirroring the trends we've observed in CapEx and OpEx, the levelized cost of energy has also decreased. Next slide, please. Given that most of the financing in the sector comes from grants, subsidies, and financing from impact investors, understanding what impact mini-grid projects have is crucial, because that eventually determines the effectiveness of public funding in driving sustainable development, and it also allows the various stakeholders to evaluate which approaches work best and identify potential areas for improvement. Several years ago, the focus was mostly on number of connections, but thankfully, we've gone past the stage. Impact considerations are now much broader, and they include economic, social, and environmental factors, and there is also an effort to link those to various SDG goals. However, there's still a lack of a standardized approach, and this is problematic both for the developers and for funders. Developers have to comply with different reporting templates, and they have to collect different metrics for each funder. And that poses a significant cost to them. Also, if developers want to tap into climate financing as an additional source of financing, there needs to be some standardization in the way that carbon emissions displacement is reported. Next slide, please. Now, what I'd like to do is to take a step back from the trends we've identified and discuss the recommendations we want to make based on the data, based on the interviews we've had. How can we accelerate the growth of the market? The recommendations were many. There are more than 20 in total, but we don't have the time to go through all of them today. So for now, I will focus on just a few of them. We tried to keep the recommendations specific and actionable rather than at high level, and that's why we call them areas of action for each stakeholder. Starting with the public sector. The public sector plays a crucial role in shaping the future of mini-grids. And by public sector, I mean ministries, regulators, rural electrification agencies, and utilities. No matter how much effort development partners put into developing innovative programs, it's ultimately up to the government institutions to create the enabling environment that allows private companies to develop at scale and to operate sustainably. How can they do that? First of all, it's important that mini-grids are not just integrated into national electrification plans, but we also ensure there is clarity and predictability in distribution network expansion so that developers and financiers can invest in projects with more confidence. Also, integrated energy planning, as Irene was mentioning earlier, is no longer a buzzword. It's becoming a foundational principle. It's important that we remember, no matter how passionate we are about mini-grids, that while mini-grids are great, they're just one of the supply options we have available. And the job of the regulators and the financiers that provide the grants is to allow developers to offer different combinations of supply options, whether that's mini-grids, solar home systems, or mesh grids. It's also important that tariffs are cost reflective so that developers can operate sustainably, but at the same time, government should partner with development partners to ensure that grants and preferably results-based financing is provided to private companies, and that is captured into the tariff calculations so that then the companies can supply electricity services at an affordable price. And we also need champions for mini-grids within the government who can help bring together the diverse group of stakeholders, raise awareness regarding the role of mini-grids, help secure funding and resources, but most importantly, help to ensure the regulations are implemented efficiently. Applications for permits are evaluated promptly and not after 12 months, but when a funding window of some grant program will already be closed. Because it's one thing to have a great regulation in place, and it's a different thing to make sure it's implemented as it should be. For development partners to help the sector scale, standardization is really important. Asking developers to comply with different grant application processes and reporting requirements is very costly. So while there have been efforts to develop templates to assess performance and set standards for the sector, there's still a lot of work to be done to streamline these processes. And in this respect, AMDA's role is crucial. AMDA is the voice of private developers, and we need to make that voice louder. We need to make sure that we listen to those voices, to those needs and to the concerns of the developers when we design a mini-grid program. What do they have to say about the choice of the technology, for instance, or the structure of financing? Extending the duration of donor programs is also key. If we want to support developers to achieve scale and create a viable market in the countries where they operate, that takes time. Getting the approvals in place and the permits and licenses takes time. Finding skilled people to operate the mini-grids takes time. Business development activities take time. So donor programs need to account for this and also other potential delays. There is also an emphasis on productive use, as Irene mentioned earlier, not only to improve the financial viability of mini-grids, but also to empower consumers and promote development in the communities where mini-grids operate. But it's clear from the discussions we've had with developers that a lot of them do not have the capacity or the skills to add this additional layer to their business model. And this is where development partners can come in to help roll out these projects and provide affordable financing solutions to productive use equipment and appliances. And it's really important, I want to emphasize this, to ensure that these programs, these PUE support programs, come before mini-grids are built and not after, so that these loads are incorporated into the design of the mini-grids. For the private sector, aggregation will be a key factor for the financial viability. By bundling projects together, we can attract larger pools of capital and reduce the risks associated with financing smaller individual projects. But for me, one of the most important takeaways from this report is the need for collaboration. We see multiple donors and investors conducting due diligence studies in parallel for the same regions. We see organizations collecting the same type of data for different studies. We see developers asking for more concessional financing, but yet they're reluctant to share data on how their mini-grids are performing. And while through the mini-grid partnership group, there's an effort to coordinate these initiatives, it's important that we understand that no single institution, no matter how big it is, can achieve the growth we need in the sector. We need each other, and we need to be united, and we need to find a way to work more efficiently together in order to make sure the mini-grids are deployed faster, at scale, and that they operate sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. I will now pass the mic to Stephen Hunt, Senior Energy Innovation Advisor at FCDO. Stephen, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Maya. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, great to be here, and great to hear these initial findings, and great to see a lot of colleagues and friends on the on the call. Yeah, I want to start by thanking the authors, ECA and Odyssey, and also all the people at the Mini-Grid Partnership who've put in so much effort to bring this State of the Market report into reality. I know a lot of people have contributed also from the AMDA members, contributing their data, the Mini-Grid Funders Group members contributing their data, lots of reviewers. I saw a great list of names there of those who have contributed their ideas and their feedback to making this report a reality. So thank you to everybody who's been part of this. I know it's been a big lift. I know that the effort, to bring this data together, it's not easy. And I think we'll talk more about that later. In terms of just a few initial reactions from me, and I know that lots of people on the call will have their own sort of takes, but I think it is encouraging, the 6 times growth statistic. The sort of direction of travel towards solar being a larger share, solar and battery, I think also very positive. I think we still have some work to do to present clear sort of single figures in terms of the total number of mini grids and the growth rates, and I think hopefully we can bring that together increasingly in future versions of this report. But I think that probably the strongest aspect for me, I think that which came out also in Elena and Irene's presentations was about some of these really important trends. And I think the trend towards more and more integrated approaches, where mini grids are seen as one element of a series of solutions, I think that's really important, and it is happening. And I also see it in things like the big Mission 300 announcement from AFDB and World Bank, and hopefully we'll hear about that later a bit as well. But you see mini grids as part of these much larger electrification efforts, and I guess that you can see that as a kind of a mainstreaming. and then we have to think about how they deliver next to other solutions. I think the trends around increasing vertical integration and portfolios are also kind of encouraging. I think everybody knows that we need to see more scale. We need to see more portfolios, more economies of scale. Distributed utilities effectively are able to sort of access capital more cheaply, be more efficient, manage risk across portfolios. So I think it's positive. I think we hopefully we need a few heroes, I think, in the mini grid space. I'm hoping Husk or Cross Boundary or others could be some of those, like the MCOPAs of the household solar sector, which I think really acted as lead firms and kind of showed what's possible. So I think that's a positive trend, but others might well have other views in the chat. I think the financial analysis is really important here. I think Elena's right. Development capital there's only so much of it out there. The demand for subsidy is wide, but I think the report does a really good job of both highlighting the continued importance of grant and RBF and their current role, but also the importance of additional revenues, whether that's the DREX, PREX, carbon finance, how those can kind of come in on the one hand to kind of boost the upside, not entirely relying on subsidy, but also a lot of the progress in terms of bearing down on costs. And some really encouraging numbers in there around about solar batteries, capex, opex, and the levelized costs. So yeah, really great to see that brought together. And I think it'd be interesting to reflect. I don't know if the authors would have a view, or I know Cross Boundary Innovation Lab, I don't know if they're on the line, have done some work on this, but what is the kind of inflection point? What's the threshold after which, we might see a more accelerated take up? We know there's more to it than costs, but certainly that kind of combination of revenues, costs, IRR, what's the right threshold? But hopefully we're getting closer to it. I think, useful insights I could see around productive use, the continued kind of growth and embedding of that. Mesh grids is an interesting one. I remember one of the first mini grids I visited was one of the Devergy mini grids in Tanzania, and that was a mesh grid. So interesting to see how that has kind of come back and could perhaps be a way, as Elena was saying, or Irene, of bringing together some of the tremendous progress I think that we have seen and will see in rooftop solar into more of a mini grid context where that kind of sharing is possible. A few final thoughts before we get onto the panel. I think that I feel a little bit like the mini grid sector has gone a little bit quiet in the last year or two, and I hope that this state of the market report and some messages around it and some communications from the mini grid partnership and others can kind of bring it a bit more back into focus. What share of these big targets can mini grids realistically deliver? And just get the word out a little bit, because I think there is momentum here. I think there is progress, and I see it, but maybe it doesn't always feel like that. So I hope that this report and continued future effort on data and communication of that progress can help, fuel the sense of momentum. I think one just little vignette I want to leave you with is I'm off to Mozambique next week, which I'm very excited about, to help with the review of our Brilio program. Just one program in the FCDO portfolio, but focused on Mozambique. And it covered household solar mini grids and clean cooking. So we'll see. I'm going to go down there. They're thinking about the possibilities for the future, Brilio 2. They're looking for recommendations. Most of the results so far have come from household solar and a bit from clean cooking, but mostly household solar. So, so there you are. You're thinking, well, do we do more on mini grids? Do we do more in household solar? Do household solar need less? Or do we go with where the results are? And I think one of the issues, I'll learn more in Mozambique, and if people have views on Brilio, I'm in the market, so please send me them. But it has been slower going, setting up the regulatory environment, managing all the different risks associated with the investments to get mini grids into a situation where you can deploy results-based financing, which is one of the things Brilio has. So yeah, I'm going to be interested to go out there and learn that. But I think this is a little bit the conundrum for mini grids more broadly. It's not been as quick as we hoped. There is a lot of opportunities. But yeah, I just think that this report does a great job of bringing together some of that information, helping provide some benchmarks, illustrating some trends, and I hope that that will help all of us in the sector to make the most of mini grids, whatever share eventually of FTG 7 they deliver. Thanks, and I'll pass back to colleagues.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your continued support. It is now time for our panel discussion. But please, I just wanted to mention once again that when you ask questions in the Q&A box, please state who the question is for so that the designated person can reply to you. So while working on the report, it was obvious that data collection and then standardization were some of the challenges the team had faced, and that it is really important to find uniform ways to uniform the process. And I'll pass now the mic to Irene again, who will moderate this part of the launch. And please ask the questions by stating who the question is for. Irene, are you still with us?
Yes, I am, Maya. It's just that I cannot turn on the video because it's blocked. Maybe the host can fix that. But on the meantime, in order to avoid wasting time, so the idea of this panel, just for a short introduction, is about the importance of data collection. I think that, as I mentioned before, along with ECA, we have done an amazing work at trying to get information, at trying to get data, and not only ourselves, but as Stephen mentioned, with AMDA, with the World Bank, all of us united. Still, it is a challenge, and it's not a matter of willingness to share data, but sometimes it's very complicated in one project to understand and to not double count. For example, who put the equity, what part is a grant, what part, because some people talk about the total project, etc. So we really need to think about a proper methodology as a sector instead of going one by one to unify data collection, to have shares database and trying to work together. So this is the context of this panel, but not only that, just another point, which is, okay, of course we need data collection, but for what purpose? How is that going to help us deploy more mini grids and more connections? So that being said, what I'm going to do is just to put a couple of questions out there and then do a round with all our panelists. So you can do a very short introduction, especially for the people who haven't speak yet, and maybe answer these two questions that we will see now in the next slide. I think, or not. Anyway, the questions are, first of all, about the data collections. What are the barriers and the difficulties you have faced and how to improve that? And the second one, which is the second topic I brought up, is what do we do with this data? How can we use this data in a way that allow us to deploy more mini grids faster and in a scalable way? So I hand over the microphone in the same order that you can see in the slide. So Stephen, the floor is yours again.
Sure, I can go again. I was hoping maybe to go last since you just heard from me, but I'll go briefly. Yeah, so a few points on data, maybe following on from my earlier points. I think the fundamental issue is if you don't have any information, if you don't have the data, it is very, very hard to communicate from a donor perspective why that thing should continue to be supported. You know, you need the information about momentum, you need the information about what's happening, you need to know what's working, where. And I think this kind of foundational data is actually, it is kind of a public good. And this is where I think this is one of the reasons obviously we've, as FCDO through the T program supported this report, is to try to make sure that that data is available for us so we can communicate to our leadership, you know, what are our efforts leading to, what's happening, what is the wider shift. but also because we know that others need it, and it's not possible for individual companies or individual partners to produce. So you need this organized and collective effort, as the mini grid partnership has enabled. I think there's also important, obviously, the investors need to know the scale of the opportunity. We're often asked by potential new donors, but also investors, what is the potential scale here? And that being able to answer that question convincingly is very important. I think we, in terms of communicating our results, it's important for our programs, but also for the sector. I think this is something actually I'd like to give a lot of credit to the Universal Energy Facility for. I think that UEF's got a lot better at communicating the story of what's happening where. So those live dashboards from Nigeria as well, from the project there about what's happening, that kind of stuff we just need to get better at that as a sector. If you look at the sort of trends in technology and markets, it is more and more data driven, and having the data becomes the key source of competitive advantage. We mentioned a little bit machine learning. I think we're way earlier than that, but we should be getting to a situation where AI is playing a much more kind of active role in helping drive, once we've got more and more projects, you need better and better data. So I think that's something we need to get a lot better at. The learning, the insights, understanding the risks. Once you have better data across portfolios, you can then understand and model risks a lot better as well. So there's lots of good reasons for having better data. And yeah, all maybe just to close out, I think we on the donor side have a responsibility to invest to some extent in terms of the public goods value of that data, and that we are, and hopefully more donors indeed will join to make sure we do have the right investment at that level. And then the firms, I hope the firms and we'll look forward to hearing from AMDA colleagues in a minute, but I hope that they'll also understand the value of communicating at the sector level in a way that individual firms can't. So yeah, it is really important. I think, I really hope that I really again commend the efforts of the authors for bringing this together, and I hope that we can do an even better and even more consolidated job next time around.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I couldn't agree more, and I remember from the times I was a developer, I have spent so much time taking data from reports just to convince management on the investor side, but also to convince donors or even regulators asking me, oh, what is happening in another country or blah, blah. So I think that the fact that we have this data and it's been shared across the sector is key to continue the scale up. So thank you very much. I hand over now the microphone to Benjamin Curnier. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irene. And let me also iterate my thanks and my compliments to all the SC for All team, the ACA team, to the T team, and all those who have contributed to this enormous report. I know that there's an awful lot of work gone into it, and I'm thrilled that I was able to contribute in just a very small manner at the end by being one of the privileged few to read an early version of the report. So thank you. In terms of how I suppose SEPA interacts with the mini grid data, maybe a slightly different perspective to Stephen's, and that is, we're often appraising projects, be they for the private sector or indeed for the financing of larger government country programs. And I think, one of the first key challenges that we still come across today, and that is really getting what I would regard as accurate CapEx information. So, the tension that we have and that we face is that we obviously want to promote projects that are commercially viable, but that we're not sort of massively over subsidizing. And therefore having credible capital costs at the outset is really highly important. And actually we still struggle, I would say, to get probably sort of accurate capital costs at the outset of a project, because those numbers can vary enormously. Depending on the location, depending on the nature of the project, and that becomes then very difficult to defend internally when we're going to ICs, because we're struggling with those comparable benchmarks. That and that's also then linked to system sizing. CapEx is very much linked not just to the actual landed costs of equipment in a particular location, but then obviously that it's tied to demand estimation. And we often find that estimates around average consumption per user, average spend per user, estimates around demand growth, again, vary enormously. And we therefore sort of really struggle to actually sense check these when we're looking at an individual project. Benchmark data is often either inadequate or very generic. I have to say that we find a lot of value in the market reports that are in existence, and I refer to my esteemed colleagues ESMAP's mini grids for 500 million people, the previous state of the mini grid market report. But often those are single-digit numbers that are maybe best in class, and they're not sort of refined for maybe a particular geographical region or a particular sort of technological setup. So, we struggle to sort of get that real sense. And then I'd say the last area of challenge or area that we're really focused on data, and that is, of course, the development impacts. We're doing this because we want to see electrification as a means to economic development and empowerment for those beneficiaries. And so whilst I think it's pretty easy to collect probably the connection numbers and the megawatts deployed and the megawatt hours, actually then that next layer of information is what as funders we're really after, which is of course economic empowerment, jobs, gender impacts, beneficiary numbers. And actually that linkage between the connections deployed and those development impacts is obviously extremely important. And I think we're getting much better at mapping that linkage. But of course, I think we can do more. And I'm conscious that we ask an awful lot of developers in terms of reporting that, and the methodologies and the approaches aren't always very clear. So I think, what are the best solutions to overcome some of these challenges? Well, I think this initiative that we're discussing today about trying to centralize as much of that data as possible is, of course, the solution. It's far easier said than done. I'm very aware of that. But certainly having, standardized reporting templates, increasing reliance on automated data gathering exercises, leveraging information platforms like we're doing, I think is that right step forward. And hopefully, we're going to end up with more and more sort of standardized ways of collecting that data, reporting that data, and then being able to put that data in place. So maybe just a few thoughts from me. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I think you mentioned something that is very important, which is that sometimes the range of variation is too high. And I think the reason for that is that we are averaging things that are not averageable. For example, if you have a mini grid, I'm just going to take two extreme cases, but that is connecting 15 productive use close to the generation site, and then a mini grid that connects 100% of the people in the village, the residential. How can you compare the cost of the grid? Then the average doesn't mean anything. And we need to come with some categorization to try to average things that are averageable. I don't know if that's even a word. You got me.
That's exactly the challenge I had. We've recently funded a program in Mauritania. The funding comes in at something like $3,500 per connection because we're funding in deepest, Sahelian environments. Yeah. But that's, I have no way of benchmarking that number against the kind of data that I see, from other parts of the continent. So it's a real challenge.
No, thank you, Ben. And I hope to have good news. At least I have some hope, which is we are really starting to work on that, on the idea of categorization, on the idea of thinking how to do that. And we are, of course, doing that with AMDA. So for that, maybe our colleague Eamon can talk about that. So Eamon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you, everyone. So yes, just to reiterate on that, so I'll give you one of the barriers, as you mentioned, in terms of data collection, that even as AMDA, we're trying to come up with solutions, is currently we're actually collecting data for a benchmarking African mini-grid report that we publish every 2 years. So hopefully we're publishing one later on this year. And of course, one of the barriers that we are experiencing, and I know also SC for All experienced that, was during the data collection, where it took quite a long time. Currently, it's also still taking a long time. And of course, some of the reasons that this is happening is that most of our members, especially like the small developers, are constrained in terms of staff and capacity. So they will not have enough time to give you data or respond to your information in good time. So they're taking a long time, and sometimes even some of them who were receiving data from them, it's not complete, it's a bit inconsistent, and basically, yes, that's why a lot of data collection takes a long time. So some of the solutions, as Irene is just mentioning, is we are working with different stakeholders, namely like MGP and SC for All, to come up and create a data framework which will standardize all this. So we want to see how we can be able to maybe come up with like a digital platform where we standardize what kind of data that our developers can share, and it will be able to be accessible to different stakeholders. So we are sharing this template with different stakeholders in the industry, from governments, donors, so that we are able to come up with one standard template to standardize which kind of data can be collected. And in a way, this will help just come up with a centralized data repository sort of platform where all this data can be accessible, analysis done, and to ensure a bit of accessibility. Also, another solution that also AMDA is thinking about, and I think even Benjamin has mentioned it, is how to do more digital automation data collection. So with time, what AMDA is trying to achieve, because what we are currently collecting data is through manual data collection, but we want to shift and use more digital data automation that will enhance accuracy and sort of standardization and getting more data on a granular level on things to do with like customer meters, which is consumption of how they're using the mini grids, and also some of the generation. So this will help in terms of advancing standardized analytic and comprehensive data set that can be used across the sector to avoid different platforms and different ways of how people are doing this. So yes, as AMDA, we are trying to have these solutions, and with time, this will help create, of course, once we're able to standardize all this, of course, it will help bring confidence within the sector, especially through investors who will be able to have confidence. Because once most investors are able to see transparent and central ways of getting this data, they're likely to fund and give more funding within the sector because of the perceived risk that they will be able to have access to the data. Yes, I think I'll stop there, Irene, and hand over to the next person.
Thanks very much, Eamon. I do remember, and I have experienced what you mentioned, like getting several requests per week, and at some point you think you're crazy and just like, I already feel this template, but it's a new one this time. So yes, let's really try to work on that and work as a sector. I think it's very important that there's one single source of truth, one single source of data, and that this data is shared by all of us to try to come with the data, not this report says something, the other report says something. So let's keep working on that. And now I hand over the microphone to Tatia, working for the SMAP team. So Tatia, you have a long experience onto all of this, so please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Irene. First of all, thank you for issuing this fantastic report. We know firsthand in SMAP just how much work goes into preparing something like this. And like all of my colleagues have mentioned, it's incredibly challenging to gather a lot of this data. So really kudos to the SE4All team for making this such a comprehensive effort, and also for involving so many of the sector stakeholders in the review process and in really making sure that this is as rigorous as possible. So congratulations to the team. Secondly, let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Tatiana Majava. I'm part of the World Bank Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, which is a mouthful, but we're a technical assistance program set up within the World Bank's energy team. And we support our lending projects that deploy energy access solutions across primarily sub-Saharan Africa, but globally. So I've taken quite a lot of notes based on what many of you have discussed, and I'll try to address some of the questions that came in the Q&A as well. But let me dive right in because we only have a few minutes left. So as Elena mentioned in her slides, nearly half of the total funding comes from the World Bank. There's $3+ billion, right, that was mentioned in the slides. Nearly $1.5 billion of that is World Bank financing. So in most of the markets where many goods are present, the World Bank is by far the largest lender. We're working very hard to scale that up significantly. We're working with other partners to bring in private sector and private investors and private financiers into this space through all sorts of de-risking instruments and guarantees that we have. We've been designing large regional programs. Some of you may have heard about Ascent, which is a very significant program in Eastern and Southern Africa that focuses on 20 countries in the market and targets 100 million people. It's a $15 billion regional program. The World Bank is preparing a similar program in West Africa. As I think Stephen already mentioned, we had an announcement made by the World Bank president in our spring meetings a couple of months ago about the mission 300 million people that the World Bank and AFDB are partnering together to connect in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. 250 million of that will be from the World Bank. And that, of course, will require a lot of money. $30 billion is the goal and the plan. I just mentioned $1.5 billion, 30 billion. That's a very significant difference. So obviously we cannot do this alone, and that's not the goal or the plan. That's why we're designing these larger programs where we can really create the economies of scale, bring in a lot of partners, unlock a lot of the local finance, hopefully for developers, and bring in a lot of de-risking tools that would make this more attractive to local developers, international companies, CNI companies, many companies that we're seeing entering the mini-grid space every day, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But talking about data is always a very complicated question in the mini-grid space, not the least so for us at the World Bank. Reliable data is really, really important for us in project preparation, and it's extremely challenging to gather, especially more and more so, I would say, because we're going into these harder and harder to reach areas and complicated, fragile markets. Most of the new programs that you'll see emerge from the World Bank are in fragile contexts. So gathering data is extremely challenging. A lot of this data, thankfully, can be collected through geospatial tools, through remote applications, but some of it needs to be done on the ground. That's one of the points that I wanted to make to Amon's earlier point and Irene's point about data standardization, which is extremely important, and we're partnering with SE4All and AMDA and other partners on this. Some of the data can be collected from the developers, but a lot of the data needs to be collected directly from the communities and from governments. A lot of the data we use proxies from the utility, for example, and many other means to get to the answer that we're looking for. My point is that this is a very complicated question and there's no one answer to it, unfortunately. That's why I'm really glad that we as a sector are continuously talking about it and working towards building a clearer picture and also understanding who is responsible for which portion of what data and the extent to which the government should be in charge and should be owning the process of gathering the data and understanding what are those communities, what are their needs. And this kind of gets me to my next point, which is demand stimulation and productive use, which is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. I know we've all been talking about productive use for a very long time, but thankfully it seems like now our governments are hearing us better, our own senior management of the World Bank is hearing us better, that productive use is not an afterthought. You can't just design a small productive use program at the tail end of an access project just because you want some people to do some light manufacturing. Productive use is really critical, not just for mini grids, but for grid survival, for economic transformation, to actually make sure that it's not just people getting electrons, but being able to do something with that electricity that is income generating, that is productive. So it's really becoming a bigger and bigger focus in our project design, which makes it that much more important that we understand what types of data we need and who is responsible and who can help us gather that data. Because if we're looking for community level data on affordability, on the profile of appliances that people might need, on how they can access financing to finance those appliances, those are really hard and challenging questions. So to answer your question, Irene, data collection is and will continue to be a very big challenge for us at the World Bank and at ESMAP. And we rely strongly in each market that we work in on our partners to support us in this process. We have a really comprehensive donor coordination process in most markets where we work. And we really try to leverage a lot of the data. A lot of this data is not energy related, right? We work with ministries of agriculture, with our own colleagues working in agriculture. We work with entities working on water, shallow groundwater mapping, and things like that to understand the profile of those communities. But at the same time, I also want to be clear, because I make this point whenever I talk about rural electrification, is that rural electrification is expensive and challenging. If it weren't so, we would already have reached universal access a long time ago. If we could just throw money at the problem, it would have been done a long time ago. I live in the United States. This country took a very, very long time to reach national electrification through a massive national subsidy program that had a lot of other associated programs with it, agricultural outreach programs, technical assistance programs. So data is an extremely important tool, but it's one part of the bigger conversation, which is, for me, really empowering the governments to understand why they want to deploy mini grids or standalone solar or any other solutions, which community would benefit from which one best. And for that, we need really disaggregated profiles for those communities, right? And we need to understand what is feasible. And then support them, the whole government, not just the Ministry of Energy, not just the Ministry of Agriculture, not just the Ministry of Economic Transformation, but really work together, bringing the private sector at scale through a unified voice. Like Stephen said, it's really critical for us that AMDA is an empowered entity that can speak on behalf of all of their members and be at the table when critical energy access issues are being discussed, and really allocate these responsibilities correctly so that we can design the incentives that will unlock the market. Because a lot of the questions I'm seeing is, are mini grids reaching the scale that they need? Stephen was asking earlier, what portion of the total between now and 2030 is 900 million people that will need to be connected. 685 is the current number, but of course people will continue to have children. So we're looking at a very significant number of people. How many of those will be connected by mini grids? We in ESMAP Stephen still believe that nearly 500 million people can be connected with mini grids. But to me, that's a secondary question. I don't think technology is the question at this point. I think we all know that mini grids can do this. We all know standalone solar, mesh grids, all these different fantastic solutions that are emerging can do this. It's not a question of technology, it's a question of which solution to deploy where. And data is really important for that. Data is really critical for that, so that we understand what scale is needed, what expense is needed, what daytime load is needed, things like that to really help unlock the market. So I hope I answered your questions, Irene, but happy to talk more, obviously, about all of this.
No, of course you did, Katia, and thank you so much for that, because I think it's important. One of the things you mentioned, it's about how the US was electrified, but not only the US, like the whole world that is already being electrified. It's been more than 100 years, 150, since we started with electrification. And we are bringing all this new tech, all these new ideas to electrification. But sometimes I think we are forgetting about the fundamentals. So I think we have to combine both of them, like the fundamentals, the lessons learned for the past 150 years, plus all the new tech, all the new ideas, all the monitoring, all the data to try to converge. But it's the same that you just mentioned about the technologies. We have to root for connections, not for this technology is better than the other. We don't need that. We need connections. So in this case, also, we don't need that this a new revolutionary technology is going. No, it's a complex topic, and we need all the bits and all the pieces together. So thank you for that, Tatia, because it was very interesting. I hand over now the microphone to Maya. Maya, because you have changed the Q&A questions, so please feel free to take on.
Yeah, thank you, Ren. So we'll start with the Q&A. And I'll just mention again, if in the meantime you have questions, please just state who the question is for. I have a question for Stephen. Can energy demand side management solution be implemented in mini grids?
Thanks. I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer that question, but I don't see why not. Demand side management is just a range of tools to turn on and off demand, to maximize the use of your equipment, to avoid having to over specify. I know that mini grid operators who've tried things like electric vehicle charging and electric cooking, where they have bigger demands, they've figured they've actively spaced out when people would do those things or etc. But yeah, I think so. I think it's part of managing a mini grid, isn't it? Maybe Irene is better placed.
On that, yeah, I mean, of course, I think TTA did it some point with like code of colors with the price of electricity during the different hours. There's electrical vehicles, that's even hydrogen. I participate in a program with hydrogen as a sub-product from the batteries. So yeah, I think there's a whole investigation on the demand side management side too.
Thank you. The next question is for Tatia and Benjamin. Are the respecting donors not collecting data on the various programs they are supporting in the sector? And how are the donors collaborating or on data in the mini grid sector?
Do you want me to go first, Maya?
Sure.
Okay. Of course, yes, of course. We collect data on the projects that we fund. As an entity funded by governments, we are obligated to disclose all of the data that we can. So if you go on the World Bank website, it's actually very, very rich in data. But there are many different types of data, right? So the World Bank collects data on the project that we are implementing, that have been agreed with the government, that have been publicly disclosed. And then we report on the number of connections that were made, the disbursement rate, and things like that. But the types of data that we need to design our projects, that's very different, right? And that varies from context to context, and that is well before the disclosure process comes in. There's no one standardized process. There's a team that comes together, and we collect that data on the ground or through donor coordination, and each context is completely different and unique. We have a program in Niger. Data collection there will be vastly different from the program that we have in Nigeria and neighboring countries. So it's not one size fits all. And like I said earlier, I think there are many different types of data and nuanced approaches needed for that. In terms of partnering, we are very keen generally on donor coordination. Me personally, I work in several markets where it's really urgent and important for me to work with key partners and understand who's doing what and at what stage, and coordinate our efforts to share data and also to design our programs to be complementary. But that's also market specific. We have country teams in each country that are leading that dialogue, and they decide how they feel the donor coordination should be done. We in ESMAP always strongly encourage donor coordination within specific markets that we support, but it's up to the team in the country ultimately to design and decide on that process. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Tatia. I think you've largely covered it. I might simply add that I think as donors working in lots of markets and across lots of situations, we could be better at donor coordination. I think in the mini grid space, I'm pleased to say, in the 2 or 3 years that I've been in this role, I've seen a marked improvement in the collaboration across the different donors to try and co-develop or at least coordinate programs in different locations. I'm pleased to say that we are increasingly coalescing around standardized tools and documents, be they regulatory tools and instruments or tariff tools. I think of the R4 tariff tool as an example. And so, you know, and whilst I have the mic, I take advantage of the fact of just to mention the fact that we are kicking off a process with the IFC in an effort to try and develop some tailored ESG frameworks for the mini-grid space to be deployed in our various funding initiatives. That's literally kicking off as we speak. But I think it's symptomatic of a acknowledgement that we need to be more coordinated, and it's little step by little step.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Aman from AIMDA. In terms of data on availability and willingness to pay, how useful is this data, which is collected via questionnaires, and how does it impact when evaluating financing for mini-grids? Or is there a way to validate the information?
Okay, thank you for the question. So when we are collecting data from our members, first of all, we do this and we make sure it's anonymized and aggregated. And the reason for this is, of course, for confidentiality reason. We find that most of our members, of course, do not want to give certain information and data. However, once we aggregate and give some of this information, you find that we are trying, because our benchmarking Africa Mini-Grid report actually covers, targets different players in the market. And one of them is the investors and donors. And this way they're able to see how the sector is performing over a period of time. And the reason we just do this is to enable to show transparency in terms of performance metrics of how this data, what the mini-grid developers are doing in the sector, and what they need to accelerate to go into scale. So to evaluate in terms of how to finance the mini-grid, it's in totality, but we do know our private developers actually directly talk to some certain financiers, and they need to have some certain due diligence that they work with directly to get this sort of information. But on our side, how we collect this data is we collect it from all our private members, but we sort of aggregate it. And this way helps the sector, the stakeholders, the financiers and the investors to get to know what is happening within the sector, how much money has been promised, how much has been deployed, just as what the State of Global Market Report is stating. So the idea here is just to show transparency, information on what is happening in the sector. And this helps most of the investors to know how to invest and finance within the sector.
Thank you so much, Eamon. We have time for just one more question, and then we have to wrap up. This is a question for Takia again. Is there an active work for more friendly policies for mini-grids to make them more popular?
Absolutely. Our team in ESMAP actually will work a lot with regulators on developing mini-grid regulation. It's a very big part of our job. Not to plug our product when the CIFRL's report is being launched, but our report from 2022, Mini-Grids for 500 million people, talks quite a bit about the critical importance of regulation and what the World Bank and many other partners are doing, working with regulators on developing a mini-grid friendly regulation. Stephen, I think, mentioned in one of the answers as well that the African Forum for Utility Regulators is developing some really interesting tools to support the development and drafting of regulations. They have this new regulatory tool that's coming out at the moment, and we're supporting them in disseminating it because we really strongly believe that mini-grid regulation is critical. But it's only the beginning of the process, right? You can have a draft template, but for the regulator to actually be supported in understanding how that template can be implemented, how to go about the licensing process, how to go about the review process, how to talk about tariffs, which is an incredibly sensitive topic. That needs to be a much bigger conversation that the government and the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Energy need to be involved in. So that's where we usually come in as the World Bank, and we help them understand what is feasible and what is realistic and what is equitable for their people as part of the preparation of energy access programs. So absolutely, it's a very big part of our role is to support the regulation.
Thank you very much, Tatia, for the response. We are at the time, it's 4:30, so we have to wrap up. Thank you very much, our dear panelists and speakers and dear participants for joining. I would like to remind everybody that the report is already available on the mini-grid website and also on the SE4All website, and it is available in English, French, and Portuguese. If we go to a next slide, you will see the links. However, both the presentation and the recording will be shared with everybody. Once again, we would like to thank the Transforming Energy Access platform, without whose support the report would not be possible. And we thank ECA for really a great work on the report. Thank you very much, everybody. Again, have a great rest of the day or a good evening. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Bye.